Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Buffalo Sports Talk of Western New York. I'm Tom Hastings, my partner Tom Joyce, and today let's talk Jim Kelly, his life and career and in football. And Tommy, I think this is going to be a really fun episode of Let's Talk.
Yeah, Jim Kelly is, arguably the most popular sports figure in Buffalo history. That is in the process of changing, maybe, with our current quarterback.
We'll see.
But, he is an icon of icons, that's for sure.
Yeah, and, the funny thing is he is probably my favorite all-time, Bill, my favorite all-time athlete from Buffalo, and it sure didn't start that way. But let's talk real quick about his early days. He he grew up in East Brady, Pennsylvania, tough blue-collar town. He was the star of his local high school football team. Of course, living with his brothers there, it was a tough lifestyle. His parents raised them to be tough guys. And when they would go into the house with an injury, bleeding from something that happened, the parents would tell them to suck it up, stop crying, be tough. It was just they call the phrase Kelly Tough.
Yeah.
And it started way back in East Brady in those days. Famous picture of him with Terry Bradshaw, of course, when he was a young kid. He loved the Pittsburgh Steelers and he loved Penn State. He wanted to play quarterback for Penn State after high school. And Joe Paterno told him, hey, we already have our quarterbacks, but we think you'd be a great linebacker. And Jimbo called his brothers up and asked, they go, what do you think? Paterno wants me to be a linebacker. And his brothers told him, hey, you know what? When you're on an airplane, the stewardess don't say, hey, who's the linebacker for the team? They say, who's the quarterback? And Jimbo said, sold. You don't need to say anything else. I'm the quarterback. And, he went to a few colleges and finally settled on Miami, the University of Miami. It was the first time he had ever seen palm trees, and there were the pretty girls and the lifestyle out there, and something that Jimbo was never accustomed to seeing growing up in East Brady, and he fell in love with that limelight. And he really, something that doesn't get talked about, I think, enough, is he helped turn that football program around. It was a losing football program before he got there. And Jimbo had a really stellar career in Miami and helped turn that entire program around. And then that brings us to the 1983 draft in the NFL, one of the most famous drafts of all time, featuring not only Jim Kelly, but of course Dan Marino, John Elway, Ken O'Brien, just to name a few. It was Tony Eason, I believe, was also in that group. So they called that the big quarterback year. And what's your memories of that, Tommy? 1983. Think about it. Joe Ferguson, his career in Buffalo was starting to wind down. Buffalo needed a new direction. And we picked Jim Kelly, and I want to get your take. What was your thought when Jim Kelly said no thank you?
I think that the entire region felt slighted. It felt like a slap in the face. It was a major disappointment. As you said, with Joe Ferguson leaving town, Bills fans really wanted a winner to come in. They really wanted someone who could take the reins and guide this team to the playoffs. And Jim Kelly was viewed as that big gunslinger with the strong arm. He's going to come here and take charge of this team. And he said, I would rather not play the NFL than play for Buffalo. And
right.
Again, it was a real hard pill, I think, for Bills fans to swallow at the time.
It really was. And, Joe Ferguson was still here in 83. And, in fact, even in 84, he played a few games before the Bills would move on to Joe Dufek. And who was the other quarterback we got from the Rams?
Vince Ferragamo.
Vince Ferragamo. It was a nightmare show. In 84 and 85, the Bills go 2-14. And meanwhile, we're seeing Jim Kelly in the USFL playing for the Houston Gamblers and becoming the USFL's MVP, and in interviews saying stuff, where would you rather play football, Houston or Buffalo? And just putting the city down. And it's amazing. That's why I say it's amazing to me that now I look back and think of him as my favorite all-time player. And at that time in those mid-'80s, I absolutely hated him.
Right. I think everybody did. And it goes to show, the fickle finger of fate, as they say, that someone who was so adamant not wanting any part of Buffalo, will become one of the biggest cheerleaders that the city's ever
Still
seen.
lives here to this day, Tom. Still lives here to this day. And when I was at the final game at the stadium this past winter, he gave a great speech at halftime in that game that brought me to tears. And it just he's just such a part of Buffalo now. It's hard to imagine that back in 83, 84, 85 that he was just a complete jerk to the city, and that you just hated him. He was a villain.
Well, he's done a lot over the years. He's addressed that, and he's talked about how immature he was and how he needed to grow up. And I think that we all can relate to that.
Yeah, it's true, and that's why you forgive him for it now. And I'm only even bringing it up now because it's part of his history,
right.
and that growth. And I think that's one of the things that draws me to Jim Kelly, is the growth that you could see him as a person, as a human being. And I think it all stems back from that East Brady upbringing and the tough upbringing, and then going to the glamorous Miami nightlife and the palm trees and the pretty girls and eating steak and lobster and being a high profile player, after coming from such a small town.
Right.
And I think that kind of played with his head, which anybody out there who's 19, 20 at the time can remember being 19, 20 years old. Most of us were pretty much jerks back then, thinking we knew everything.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of life kicking you in the butt before you realize the important things in life.
Right.
And that's exactly, we saw that in real time happen with Jim Kelly. Now in 1976, the USFL folds. The Bills offer Jimbo at the time, which was like a record deal of $8 million a year, and he finally comes to Buffalo town. And, I can remember watching him. There's been 3 times in my life as a fan of the Buffalo Bills that I can remember having this feeling of first of all, in 1973, seeing Joe Ferguson throw a pass after watching Dennis Shaw throw those blooper passes, and seeing Joe Ferguson throw the bullet pass and saying, wow, what a difference in a quarterback. And then again in 1986, after suffering through Joe Dufek and Vince Ferragamo and the mess that the Bills quarterback situation was in those mid-'80s, all of a sudden seeing Jimbo, you could see it automatically in that first game against the New York Jets when he came out. Tommy, it was like night and day.
Right.
Seeing, this, we finally have a real quarterback. And then the third time that happened for me, of course, was when we had Josh on the field. And I could even remember in his rookie season, Josh making passes that I said, I don't think any other quarterback in the NFL can make this pass. Right. Even though he was still growing at the time, right. You saw that special quality that Josh had that we hadn't seen since Jim Kelly retired, really. So Jimbo becomes a Bill, and the team's fortunes start changing, almost automatically. They were. I believe they finished 4-12 in that first season. It was a tough season, but you see the Bills adding players. In '85 they draft Bruce Smith. They have Andre Reed. '87 they get Cornelius Bennett, and you start seeing the team changing. And that '87 season, I remember a game against Denver where they beat the Denver Broncos, who would go on to play in the Super Bowl, and you see this team as a different team. And by 1988, Tommy, Jimbo has Thurman Thomas now in the backfield, and Marv Levy is leading a team that you felt were strong Super Bowl contenders.
Yeah, and Marv, recognized Jim's arm strength right away. He recognized his potential, and he crafted that, the famous K gun around him. Right. And the Bills became the most lethal offense in the league.
Well, again, with that adversity that the Bills were facing, if you think of that 1988 season, a lot of those games were won on the leg of Scott Norwood. The Bills' offense wasn't what you would say a huge juggernaut that they would become in 1990, but you could see the beginnings of it. You said you remember being at the game in 1988 against the Jets when they won the division, right. And that was a field goal game. Right. So, the K-gun had not really officially started yet, but you just felt with Jim Kelly at quarterback that this team was about to blossom, and you saw some of the other weapons that they were starting to develop and to get in his corner, and you felt this team was just a team of destiny. And then 1989 happens, and again that growing up that Jim had to do when he starts calling out his teammates and blaming them for losses. And he gets injured in a game against the Colts as well. And Frank Reich comes in and wins 3 games for him and keeps us in playoff contention. And it was still a rocky road when Jimbo comes back. And the team gets called the Bickering Bills because Thurman Thomas goes on a local talk show and asks the question, what do you think the problem with the team is? He says,
Quarterback.
And Jimbo and Thurman go at it a little bit in the press with each other until finally they have to do a press conference where Jimbo tries to write it off, saying everything was blown a little bit out of portion. A little bit of trying to blame the press again, which I thought was a little bit of Jimbo trying to skirt that responsibility a little bit. He still needed to grow. And I think where we saw a big turn in Jimbo's personality and him as a player and that team coming together was the 1989 playoff loss to the Cleveland Browns. And, of course, that game is known as the drop with Ronnie Harmon dropping the game-winning touchdown. But that game was the birth, really, of the no-huddle, hurry-up, K-gun offense of the Bills. And both Jimbo and Thurman Thomas broke out in that game as major superstars.
Yeah, it was a situation where the pieces were all there. They just needed to gel. And again, as you said, it took a couple of seasons for that to happen. But you could see that there was a lot of talent there. That if they could come together in the way that we hope they could achieve great things, which is exactly what happened. That 89 game against the Browns, I think in a way that needed to happen.
Yeah.
Because that kind of put the team on the path where I think they understood we can really do something here if we can play together. And from that point on, there was a different feel for that team.
It was a part of the maturity, and you started really seeing Jim start to buy into the Buffalo mentality too, and you could tell that he was starting to fall in love with the city. Now we got to talk about growing up in this area, and especially during this time. I got to put it in this perspective, Tom. This team, that Buffalo Bill team, and Jim Kelly in particular, that was the last time that we had players, 2 of us, that were older than us.
Yeah.
Seriously, that was basically our team. These are players that were our age or a little older than us playing football, and it was the last time that would happen. Now they could be our kids or even our grandkid. Hard to say, but it's true. But we would be going out around the town, and there was a big rumor about Jim being egotistical and treating people poorly. Mm-hmm. What are your memories about that time period with Jim? Not necessarily on the football field, but his reputation around town.
One time we were at a concert at Darien Lake for a concert, Leonard Skinner, and we were in the beer garden beforehand, and Jim Kelly was there. I was with a friend of mine, and at the time his pregnant wife, a couple that we know, and she approached Jim for an autograph, and he responded with, "No thanks, I'm just here to have a beer." And she walked away forlorn, and our immediate reaction was, who turns down an obviously pregnant woman for an autograph? That didn't sit so well with us at the time, but I think that speaks to what you're saying about he still maintained that attitude even then of I'm a little bit better and bigger than the rest of you, and it was something that I look back on and say, well, chalk it up again to youth.
And it's part of the. Well, now he was getting into if that's around 1990, he's like almost 30 years old. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a slow maturity.
Yeah.
But again, I think being in this region, being in this small town Buffalo, he's Elvis in a small town. He's right. That big shark in a small pond. And I think that was another thing that got to his head. He knew what this team meant to this area and what he meant to this area. And it kind of went to his head. I've got a kind of different perspective of it because I was a caddy. I worked part-time as a caddy at South Shore Golf Course during this period of the great Bills teams. And I caddied for Jim Kelly, and I met a lot of those great players from that team. And I won't say who I thought were the really good guys and who were the really bad guys because I don't want to get into all that stuff. But I can say my experiences with Jim were different than some of like that experience you guys had. He was a great tipper to us. He treated me like respectfully, and when we would finish the day, he would close down the bar. And he would just say, your money's no good, and he paid the bill at the bar, and we had some really great parties there. And that's where I got to meet a few of the other guys. And again, I don't want to go into some personal stories of the way some of the guys acted, but I can say with all sincerity that hearing all the stories about what a jerk he was to so many people, I'm happy that I didn't get to experience that. I experienced another side of that. Yep. And I also, years later, when he is retired, I worked for a construction company a company that delivered construction equipment, and they were sponsors, and they still are sponsors of the Buffalo Bills. And so the Bills, I was able to deliver whenever you saw heaters on the field or fans on the field, all that stuff. I'm the guy that I used to be able to drive my truck down to the field and place all of them where they needed to be placed, the generators outside and everything. And so when Jimbo was building his house, he hired our company for a lot of equipment that he needed out there, but he didn't want us to see exactly where his house was. So I used to have to meet him out on the 400, and we would select, go near this exit on the 400 and pull over, and I'll meet you there. And say he had an excavator or something that he needed, I would take it off of my truck and put it on his truck, and he would always give me $20, $50 tip. Hey, thanks for the help, bud, and stuff like that. And he was cool to me that way. He just didn't want us to know exactly where he lived, and I understand that, but I could personally, he was the guy driving his truck. He didn't send somebody else out to pick up the equipment. He was there. So all my experiences that I had with him personally, I can say were great experiences, and it hurts hearing about he still needed to grow up when you hear stories like that.
Again, you can hit anybody on a bad day, and everybody has their own moods. At the time, again, his feeling was, I'm here for non-football related.
And I'm sure drinking's involved too. We don't always act like the best person when we're drinking.
I just want to, relax and have a couple. And, time mellows memories. And what at the time made us, hurt or stung a little bit, you look back on now and say, who are we to judge someone? Everyone has their good days. Everyone has their bad days. And he's an individual just like the rest of us. And at that time, his thinking might have been, I don't want to sign an autograph. Maybe that'll attract more people. I'm kind of standing here unnoticed right now.
And his whole day is going to be signing autographs.
So you look back and you say, your judgment of people changes as you get older. And that's one of those things.
And also celebrity, something that we don't really understand what celebrities go through or the stalking. He doesn't know who we are. We know who he is.
Yeah.
We recognize him, and we feel that he's like a family member, right? He's a guy that we cheer for, and he's beloved. He has no idea who we are. We're walking up. He doesn't know if we're somebody with a gun or a knife or a nut or just a fan. You don't know. And so that's got to be a weird experience, for somebody not knowing who this person is walking up to you, talking to you like
they know you.
We're best friends forever. It's got to be a weird feeling. Yeah. So as I grow up, I was angry hearing those stories about him being a jerk. But as I've grown up too, I feel like my perspective has changed a little bit about, you put myself in those shoes and how I would feel if some stranger was coming up and sticking a pen in my face and saying, sign this, so we'll take his side on that, I guess, as we get older. But we already did a show on those Super Bowl teams and the Super Bowl years. We all know what happened in 1990 through 1993 and the Super Bowl losses. But I want to talk just for a second, Tom, your take on how that must have been psychologically for Jim and the fact that he was always able to get up, that whole team, but Jim in particular, the leader of that team. That was also a period where he was inviting the team over every home game to have parties at his house to try to make a more family atmosphere around the team, especially after that Pickering Bill situation. Yeah. And the ability that he had to be able to pick himself up, dust himself off, and say, let's start from scratch again is something that has to be admired.
Absolutely. he took a beating back in that backfield a lot. As we know, he wasn't the most mobile quarterback in the league at the time. His legs were not a big part of his game. It was his arm strength that he relied on. So he took a lot of hits, and he would go down, and the famous films of getting up with the sod stuck in his mask, and he'd shake it off, get right back up behind the line, and play after play, game after game, demonstrate just this incredible resolve to win, to perform, and to achieve. And I think that's what he's most loved for by Buffalo Bills fans. That never die attitude.
It was the thing that I admired about him the most. That those teams, but especially Jim the most, is you felt bad when you saw the look on his face after Norwood misses the kick. Yeah. The look on his face when he was obviously concussed in the Washington Super Bowl game, walking off the field knowing that was defeat. Even in Super Bowl 28, after having the lead at halftime and then Thurman fumbles and the game falls apart, still fighting at the end of that game to try to score a touchdown, and walking off that field knowing after four tries that they had failed again. It hurt us personally inside. As much as we wanted to win the Super Bowl, wanted the Bills to win the Super Bowl, we wanted Jimbo to win the Super Bowl.
And as much as any fan wanted it, he wanted it 1,000 times more.
Absolutely.
And again, credit to him. He never gave up. Never looked at after those Super Bowls and blamed anybody, and he just resolved to get back out there next season and do it again. And that's, I think, one of the things. Chris Berman, famously said his he was just, his arm was for Cooperstown, but his heart was just as strong.
Yeah.
Because he was just a real competitor, the likes of which I think is one of the great competitors as a quarterback in NFL. He's not often regarded, when they make the list of the greatest quarterbacks in history. He usually doesn't make that list, although he's a Hall of Famer and he was a great quarterback.
He's usually mentioned like 20th or something.
But I think
all
that
time.
his resolve and his toughness is right near the top of anybody ever to play that position in the NFL.
Well, when you say that, he's not held in regard as far as that. Even if they had those lists of the 100 greatest quarterbacks, and he's like number 20 or something like that. Think about all the quarterbacks that have played in the NFL since the birth of the NFL,
right.
and somebody thinks he's the 20th best of all time.
Right.
That's a great honor, and I think a lot of players now. It was a different game, and the touchdown. People look at how many touchdowns did he throw, how many yards did he throw. It was a different game than it is now. So there's a lot of inflated stats I think that quarterbacks nowadays get because it's such a heavy passing game.
Right.
And it was just a different time.
He also had a great running back in the backfield that,
right.
that shoot up a lot of yards.
That was a huge, another Hall of Famer.
Right.
So, so there, and some of the great wide receivers he had to go through with Andre Reed and James Lofton and Don Beebe, and, the list goes on.
Can't forget Pete Metzelaars.
Pete Metzelaars was a really great tight end, I think.
And Butch Rock and Roll, guaranteed touchdown every time he touched the ball.
Yeah. So, Jim's career comes to an end in '96 the way that, you figured a player like Jim's career would come to an end, with him getting carried off the field, getting knocked out of the game in the Jacksonville playoff game. And I was glad that he chose to retire because I didn't want to see him go. You felt that the team was ready to move on to a different quarterback, and maybe he might have had another year left in him. That '96 season was probably his worst season as a quarterback with the Bills. You saw him with all the injuries starting to add up. He still had the heart and desire and got the team to the playoffs, but you could tell he was struggling. And I'm glad he chose to retire because I didn't want to see him go to another team. I wanted to see him just retire a Bill. It always bugs me when I know that Thurman deliberately went to Miami for a year. I think just because he was angry that Buffalo didn't re-sign him, or seeing Bruce with the Washington Redskin jersey on never looks right.
Right.
So I'm glad that Jim decided to retire a Bill. And I can remember sitting on the couch watching. My father was gravely ill with cancer, and my dad would only live a few more months after Jimbo retired. And my love for the Bills comes from my dad, and we watched Jim retire with tears in our eyes, knowing it was the end of something, and Dad kind of knowing that he'll probably never see another quarterback again. And it was a magic moment that I shared with my dad. But I can remember Jimbo talking about, he had just been married and starting his new life, and his wife was pregnant with his soon-to-be son. And that's where I think it's Jim's post-football life where he really became a great man and a true role model to all of Buffalo. We all know what happened with his son Hunter.
Yeah, and the way he approached that, him and his wife Jill, is so inspirational. I think for everybody in this community. We've seen, chronic diseases. It touched the lives of a lot of people in Western New York. Obviously, most families have been touched by it in one form or another. And Jim and his whole entire family just approached that situation with such public grace and strength that the words can't really do justice to, I think, what his approach to that meant to people in the community. It still does. His ability to just portray that strength, that I'm a father dealing with a difficult thing. Many of you are parents out there dealing with a difficult situation similar, and this is how we do it, through strength, through prayer, through grace, and whatever you want to call it. But it was powerful. He emerged as a man to really look up to, not just an athlete.
Right, and I think you can really put that on his wife. The not only what was happening with Hunter, but the influence of his wife. Jim found God. He started again. It seemed like you could just see him turning into a different person and being more humbled. And what was always admirable, Jim did this even during his playing career. The family, how he always kept his brothers close to him, how he always had his parents up in that booth. Whenever he would throw a touchdown, he would always immediately look up and point, to his mom and stuff. And his mom had to suffer through emphysema and dying in front of us. And he just grew up in front of us. And again, if for guys like us in our age group, it was the last time that we had like a role model like that, someone maybe a little bit older than us, but someone that we could relate to. Yeah. And I think that's where we felt for him when we see his son passing away. And then, of course, cancer strikes Jimbo, and he has to fight for his life to fight cancer.
Right, and again, he doesn't shy away from. He doesn't hide. He doesn't, wallow in pity, and he's public. He's out there, smiling, and still today.
His voice has changed, obviously.
Commercials.
Yeah.
He's up there. He's smiling away. He's been through, I'm sure, terrible pain and difficulties of surgeries, but it hasn't diminished his ability to get out there, like you said, on the field at the last Bills home game, to make appearances in public at his golf tournament, to get out there and remind people that, hey, I'm still here. I'm a blessed man. Even though everything I've been through, I find myself blessed. And I'm going to live my life as I want it. And again, it's so inspirational for everybody.
Yeah, as we finish up with this video, I just got to say the reason I wanted to do this is because of that. We did a video on OJ, and it was hard to do because he was a hero and role model, and we know how that ended. With Jimbo, it starts out where we hate the guy.
Yeah.
And then we see him slowly progress into changing who he is personally as a man. We see him grow as a player. We see highest of highs, lowest of lows. He stays in Buffalo after his football career. And here's something I'll say, as much as we love Josh, when Josh's career in Buffalo is over, he's a California boy. He's not going to be living in Buffalo, I would believe. I believe him and his wife will be living the life out in California somewhere. I'm sure he'll make appearances in Buffalo, but it won't be the same thing. Whereas to this day, we could be out in East Aurora somewhere sitting at a barbell or something, and Jimbo could come walking in and order some chicken wings right next to you.
He could live anywhere in the world.
and he chooses
to stay here because of his commitment to this community.
His commitment to Buffalo. You see that with all the work he does with ECMC. Right. That he credits them for saving his life. And we do shows. My wife and I do shows at ECMC monthly, and there's always pictures of Jimbo still everywhere. People. He's a folk hero. And he's a regular guy. He's got this money and the fame, but he's turned into just like kind of a regular guy. He likes to go hunting. He likes Buffalo, and he loves Buffalo. He made it his home. So it's good to have that guy that turned into a role model and something that positive.
Absolutely.
That if I take anything from Jimbo's story, the adversity that he faced growing up in East Brady, the adversity he faced on the football field constantly, turning Miami's program around, turning Buffalo around, going to 4 straight Super Bowls, picking himself up after all those losses, getting carried off the field his last game, losing his son, so early, and battling cancer, and yet still perseveres, still comes out. Think of the game. Do you remember a snow game in 2004 where Peerless Price scored a touchdown against the Miami Dolphins in the snow, and Jim Kelly is in the end zone hugging him? He's just still a Buffalo Bill fan.
Mr. Buffalo.
It's amazing. Yeah. So it's just that I'm almost tearing up like thinking about it. How that it was like almost a redemption story and a great story, and that's why Jimbo is my favorite all-time athlete, a Buffalo athlete, Buffalo football player, just all-around athlete. Tom, any last thoughts?
Yeah, we're lucky to have him. We were lucky to have the player, and now we're lucky to have the man.
Yeah, great way to say it, guys. Hey, this is going to do it for Let's Talk for this episode, and I am going on vacation, as I said, so we may or may not have another episode in the next couple weeks. I'm thinking of maybe doing an episode on my cruise, but I'm also on a cruise, and we don't know how that's going to go. I may be having a little bit too much fun to do that. I'm also going to be in New York City for a little bit, so I might film some stuff there. But if you don't see us for a week or two, it's because I'm on vacation. So I hope you guys have a good couple weeks. I would just ask you to do this, guys. Anyone watching there, while we're away, could you do us the favor and tell your friends about the channel? And share our videos on social media if you have Facebook, or if you have whatever that you can share it on.
Whatever these kids
you kids are doing these days. Tell your friends about it. If you think that somebody might be interested in just talking about local sports, not as experts or analysts, but just friends. Because as I said before, that's what we look at you guys as our friends, and we're just talking about topics that we find fun to talk about. We really enjoy it, and we like doing it with you. So share our videos. We have a bunch of videos on the channel already. Share them. Tell your friends about us, and keep us in your thoughts for the next couple weeks, because we'll be coming back with another episode of Let's Talk, at least in a couple weeks if I don't do one on the cruise. So until then, guys, thanks for watching, and hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't already, hit the bell icon so you're notified whenever we upload a new video, and thanks for watching.
Go Jim Kelly.
Go Jim Kelly. Thanks, guys.